Welcome and welcome back to my channel, Boomsy Beauty. If you are new to my channel, my name is Juliana, and in today's video I'm going to be ranking all my pastel palettes. And I actually used 3 of the pastel palettes for my high look today. That video should be coming out soon. So I've got 12 palettes in total to rank, and that's what we're going to be doing in the video. So without further ado, let's get into the ranking. In 12th place is Colourpop's in a Trance palette. So this is a palette. There's nothing to darken the outer edge, there's nothing to give it the look any depth. Now I don't mind mixing palette with another palette, but I like it to be my choice. Yeah, if I want to use 3 palettes, 4 palettes together, I like it to be my choice. And in my opinion, this is not a complete palette. It is not a complete palette at all. I mean, you can use it as maybe pull the palette out for one shade here, one shade there, but definitely not for a full look. At least not for my skin tone anyway. I mean, there's no way I can use it for a complete look. Yeah, so that's why I'm ranking it at number 12. Okay, the palette I'm ranking in the 11th position is the Barlow Yowa palette from Glam Shop. And again, it's for the same reason I ranked them in a trance in number 12. It's a palette that has no depth, so there's no shade to use to darken my outer edge or to give the look, you know, some sort of, you know, oomph, if you like. I mean, I do love the shimmers in this palette. The shimmers in this palette are beautiful. I mean, for the shimmers alone, which was the only reason I bought the palette, the shimmers are beautiful. It's got like 4 lovely mattes. As far as the matte are concerned, you can't use it for a complete look. I've got to dig into other palettes, and you know, sometimes I don't like that. Sometimes I like to be able to use a palette, you know, for a complete look if I want, as mentioned. But yeah, the shimmers are lovely though. These are the shimmers in the palette and they are beautiful. I mean, for the shimmers alone, the palette is worth it. If you are okay to, you know, to reach for another palette. But as far as my collection of pastel palettes is concerned, I've got no choice but to rank this in the 11th position. In 10th position, it's the Opal palette from BH Cosmetics, and this is the palette that they released for the Birthstone palette in October last year, which I was actually very gutted about because that's my birth month. So to have this as the Birthstone palette was quite annoying. This is a disjointed palette. It has no correlation with each other at all. It's almost like somebody put together single shades that don't even make sense together in a palette, and that's the way I see the palette. So it's literally a case of pulling out the palette to use one shade either for the inner corner or something. That's about it. As far as I'm concerned, as a palette, you know, as a whole on itself, to me it's a pretty much useless palette that you can't really do much with. If not the fact that it was my birth month palette and I had the rest and I didn't want to miss out on anyone, I probably wouldn't have got this one. So yeah, I'm ranking it in the 10th position. Ranking in at number 9 is the Fade Into Hue palette from Colourpop. And I just know what it is about this palette, apart from the fact that it has glitters. This palette, it doesn't draw me for whatever reason, whether it's because of the small pans. I mean, it is really beautiful. This section alone, in fact, if you ignore the bottom bit of it and think of the 3 top rows, it's an absolutely beautiful palette. So I don't know whether it's because of the pans or whatever it is, and it's even got darkening shades. I mean, look at that. You can use that to darken the outer corner, so you can definitely get a look with good depth with this palette. But I don't know, for whatever reason I just don't get drawn into it. In fact, I don't get drawn to any Colourpop's palette, which is why I've decided to stop buying their palettes, because I buy them and I don't use them. They don't even draw me in, so I don't think I'll be buying any other palette from them unless they come out with like a spectacular, like a really spectacular palette. But yeah, the Fade Into Hue palette is number 9 for me. In 8th place is Beauty Bay's Alice in Wonderland palette, and this palette is not actually completely a pastel palette. I mean, I won't consider this shade a pastel shade, but for the remaining 5 shades, they're definitely pastel colors and pastel shades. So I'm classifying this palette as a pastel palette. And this palette, don't underestimate them. They are so pigmented and beautiful. You can even use them completely without the shimmer, but I love my shimmers, which is the only reason why it's coming in at number 8 for me. In 7th position is the Night Thinker palette from L'Oreal Cosmetics, and this palette is actually beautiful. It is a pastel palette. I mean, look at the shades. It's a pastel palette, but it's got grungy tones, if you like, grungy colors. I mean, this purple, I think, is the color that makes the palette a bit distorting, so you almost want to think that it's not a pastel palette, but it is a pastel palette. It's just a beautiful and unique kind of pastel palette. And these are 4 of the shimmers in the palette, and I'm just going to quickly swatch those for you. They are absolutely beautiful, and as you can see, they are pastel-y. It's just beautiful and unique kind of pastel palette. I mean, the color story is beautiful. Definitely an unusual pastel like color story, but the shades are definitely pastel. Not going to swatch them, but just look at the mattes in the palette as well. Yeah, so definitely a pastel palette. Lorella Tinker palette, yeah, it's been ranked at number 7. Alright, we are halfway there, and from here on it's just a case of preference. I love the remaining 6 I'm going to be ranking, but I've just got to put them in one position or the other. But for me, they are all perfect, all the 6 I'm going to be mentioning. So in 6th place is Beauty Bay Pastels palette. Yeah, Beauty Bay Pastels palette, and this is the inside of the palette. So this palette, to me, when I bought it, it was clear that it's not a palette that was meant to be used on its own as a, you know, on its own as a palette. It was clear that you needed, you know, some other shades to add to it. So I kind of understood that from the beginning, for whatever reason, possibly because of the placement of the palette. Because if you look at the shades, all of the shades are different. There's no similar shades with the possibility of maybe using one to darken the other. For me, it was clear, yeah, the intention of the palette, how you are meant to use the palette. And this palette is pigmented. Honestly, this palette is pigmented. You know, Beauty Bay's formula are superb. The way I use this palette is mainly really to blend out other shades, like to blend out maybe a more pigmented pastel shade or a darker tone pastel shade, or even non-pastel shades at all. But that's the way I use this palette. But they are really pigmented. So these are not the kind of pastel shades where you want like a light wash of color. No, maybe if you use the lighter hand, maybe, but they are very pigmented. If you want a color that will pack a punch, either if you're doing like an editorial look where you don't need depth in your palette and you just maybe want a wash of color and you're going to do like a liner, these are perfect for it. Definitely perfect, because they will give you that pigmentation. They won't darken your outer edge or anything, but they will give you pigmentation that will make your eye look pop. Whether you're using a light base or you're not using a light base, yeah, but they pack a punch. So I absolutely recommend this palette, and it's so reasonable as well. The price, I think it's £10, but most of the time is always on sales. Definitely always on sales, or they sell it in combination with another palette I'm going to be showing you. But for me, Beauty Bay Pastel palette is number 6. In 5th place is the BH Cosmetics Lost Angeles palette. This palette is beautiful and gorgeous, especially if you're a shimmer lover like me. I mean, look at that, look at the gorgeous shimmer in this palette. Absolutely beautiful. Now again, you don't have any matte that will give you dirt in this palette, but I really don't mind, and I don't care, because the shimmers in this palette are unique. They are so unique. I mean, look at this. I won't swatch them, but just look at this, especially this shade. It's just so beautiful. I mean, fine, yeah, you might have to pull another palette while using it, but I really don't mind. The palette is just so beautiful and gorgeous. So for me, the only reason it's coming in the 5th position is because I've got other pastel palette that I love more than this. Alright, ranking in at number 4 is another unique pastel palette, and that's the Beauty Bay Utopia palette. Now you could argue that this is not a pastel palette, but it's definitely a pastel one. It's a neon pastel palette. So this is the palette, and these are the shades in. And as you can see at the bottom row, even including this shade and this shade, they are completely pastel shade. Now they've got a little bit of element of neon in them, but they are completely pastel. Yeah, this one maybe arguably might not be a pastel shade, but I like the fact that it's there, because if you need that, then you can use this to darken your outer corner. You can use the palette on its own, as well as, you know, make it an accent palette, use it with other palettes like I normally do, but you can definitely use this palette on its own. So this is the one I was talking about that is always been sold with the Beauty Bay Pastel palette. So this is the two of them side by side, and most times they're always selling them at a reduced price. I mean, look at this, how perfect are these two color stories, these two palettes. They are so beautiful. They complement each other. It's just gorgeous. If you love pastel and you love neon and you just love the possibility of the combination of the two, definitely keep your eye out for the next time they have this on sale. So they have it as a bundle and they reduce the price, or sometimes they even sell them on their own at a reduced price. But honestly, I do not regret having this palette. I absolutely love them, especially this Utopia one. Oh my days, it's so pigmented, and it's a pigment palette. So you know that pigment palettes sometimes are very difficult to blend, as if most people have difficulty anyway using pigment palettes. But this, absolutely beautiful. Every time I've used it, I've had no issues blending it out, or using it in a particular look or the other. It's an absolutely beautiful palette. Highly recommended. Utopia palette is the palette I'm ranking in at number 4. Alright, we're down to the last 3, and these are the 3 palettes on my highs today. In third place is the Nomad Tokyo palette, and this is the palette that actually got Nomad Cosmetics on my radar. When I saw this palette, oh my days, I really wanted the palette because to me it's so beautiful. Honestly, so beautiful. The color story is absolutely perfect. The mechanics of the palette, absolutely beautiful. So in bottom row you have your matte, and in the middle you have satin, and at the top you have your what I want to call toppers. So duochrome, some of them are duochrome, some of them are just shimmers, but they're like toppers. So the way you are meant to use it, or at least the way I use this palette, I use it in the sections. So using the matte first, then using the satin, and then placing the shimmer on top of it, and honestly it has a beautiful effect. So if I show you with this green, so I'm going to have this green swatched 3 times on my hand, and we'll just see how this palette works. Okay, so that's the matte swatched 3 times, and what I'm going to do now is to swatch the satin on 2 of the shades on my hand. So that's the satin going on the first one. As you can see, the pigmentation goes up a notch. Okay, so I've put the satin on 2 of the mattes on my hand, so I'm going to leave this blank just so that you can compare. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to use the shimmer shade on just 1 of the ones I placed the satin on, and then you can see the extra effect it has. So this is the green shimmer, and I'm going to put that on the first one. Okay, can you see the transformation? So look at the transformation. This is ordinary matte. So that's just the matte, nothing on top of that. Then this is the matte with the satin on top, and then finally you have the matte with the satin and then with the shimmer. Look at the difference. Just look at, it's almost like they are completely 3 different things I have swatched. But that's how you are meant to use this palette, and that's how I use this palette. It is so gorgeous when you use it this way. I mean, don't get me wrong, you can use the matte and the satin on their own, and even the shimmers as toppers. So you can definitely use each level on its own, but to get the maximum impact, or how I love to use this palette, that's the way I use it. Especially if it's got like a matching satin shade or a matching shimmer shade, that's the way I will use the palette. So you can definitely use the mattes on their own. They are so pigmented. You saw the swatches, so it's not a case of, oh, it's pastel and it doesn't show up on your lid. Yeah, this will show up. Admittedly, yes, this row is definitely toppers, but you know from the start that those are toppers. As long as you know how to use them, this palette is perfect. Most pastel palettes out there will possibly not show up on my skin tone or a skin tone darker than me. This is not one of them. This would show up. Whatever shade you use in this palette will show up on your skin tone, no matter what your skin tone is, because they do show up on my skin tone and they are pigmented, they pack a punch. So I absolutely love this palette. Definitely recommend this one. So the Tokyo palette from Nomad Cosmetics is the palette I'm ranking in the 3rd position. Alright, ranking in at number 2 is the Jamrock colored Wasichana pastel palette from Playing in Makeup by Yolondo. And this is a pastel palette with a twist. I absolutely love this pastel palette because it's got variety of colors. I mean, look at this. Look at that. Variety of colors. And they're all pastel shades. Yeah, maybe 1 or 2 might be kind of like a very dark color. Like this purple is a deepening shade, but it's necessary. This is part of what makes the palette perfect. Absolutely beautiful. I mean, look at the variety of colors in this palette. So beautiful. This is the color I first laid in my inner corner, and it was too dark. I mean, a pastel palette that packs a punch that is too dark. I had to kind of brighten it with another yellow in another palette, which was more like very, very pastel. But the shade, oh my days, it packs a punch. I mean, look at that. That's yellow. That's a pastel yellow in a palette. Absolutely beautiful. Yeah, so I love this palette. I love the uniqueness. I love the shades that are in this palette that are not in any other pastel palette, which is, you know, one of the reasons why I love the palette. It's just so unique. It's complete. It has everything. I mean, the only reason why I'm ranking it in the second position is because it doesn't have enough shimmers for me. I just wanted to have more shimmers. I mean, in this one you have what, 5 shimmers? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 5 shimmers. I mean, look at all the palette. Look at how big the palette is. Yeah, it is a 28 pan palette and there are only 5 shimmers. Yeah, for me, I would have loved more shimmers, you know, bright shimmers, lighter shimmers, darker shimmers in this palette. If that was there, this would have been my number 1, but because of that, that's why I'm ranking it in the second position. Okay, we are down to the last palette, and the palette I'm ranking in at number 1 is the Glamlite Ice Cream palette. This palette is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. In fact, this is one of the palette that if I do pan or it expires or whatever happens to it, I am definitely replacing this palette. This is the Ice Cream palette. Let me turn it this way so you can see all the shades. Look how gorgeous this palette is. It gives everything. It gives me the matte, it gives me the shimmers, it gives me brightness, it gives me candy, it gives everything. So this palette for me is complete. And I'm just going to swatch some of the shimmers in this palette because I just can't help myself. It's absolutely beautiful. I mean, look at that. Okay, these are 5 shimmers from the palette. I'm just going to swatch the one on my tongue first. Just how silky, smooth and shiny the shimmers are, and this is a pastel palette. Absolutely beautiful. I mean, if you've been on this channel for a while, you know I absolutely love my shimmers. So for me, this is like a perfect palette. It just gives everything. I mean, and there are more shimmers that I didn't swatch in the palette. I mean, if I put it together with my number 2 palette, you can see this palette. I mean, there is more like more deepening shade than in the Ice Cream palette, but with the shimmer in this one, it just makes it more attractive, you know, more pleasing to the eye, if you like. And it also makes me want to use it more because of the shimmers. Because with this palette, unless I choose to absolutely use a different shimmer from another palette, I actually don't need any other shimmer. I mean, look at this, it's complete. And it's got a few deeper shades in there as well for you to darken the outer edge, for you to get like enough depth. So yeah, so the Ice Cream palette for me, it is a perfect pastel palette. Perfect pastel palette. I mean, regardless of what your skin tone is, because it shows up on my skin tone. I mean, today I used these 2 shades, this one in the center here as well as the yellow shade, and this is the yellow I laid down on the one from the Wasichana palette. Absolutely gorgeous palette. This one is the one you have on the outer edge. I mean, this look is coming soon, but this palette for me, it is perfect. So perfect. Even the mattes are beautiful tones. I mean, look at that. That's a pastel palette. That's absolutely beautiful and yummy. So the Glamlite Ice Cream palette is my number 1 pastel palette. I mean, in all fairness, I don't really use pastel palettes much or pastel shades much. I tend to like deep looks, but if I'm going to ever dip into pastel palette, those my top 3 will be the ones I will kind of use. And that's the reason I didn't buy, or I'm not buying, the Natasha pastel palette, because even the cheaper ones, I don't use them that often, not to talk of one as pricey as that. So those are all my top 12 pastel palettes, and that's my ranking of them. Let me know in the comment section which of these palettes you've got and how you like them, or how you would rank yours, because I mean, we have different tastes and we use our palettes in different ways, but it's interesting to kind of find out other people's tastes. So yeah, let me know in the comment section which of those palettes you've got and which position would you rank them. But yeah, that's the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed my ranking and you've enjoyed hanging out with me. If you have enjoyed this video, please like it, share it and subscribe to my channel. And until next time, I'll see you.